And this could just as easily be, could just as easily be, backwoods Pennsylvania as some of the rural parts of England. And I really liked kind of this layering that it made. So here my Black is cloaked in caution and protection from me, for me, from you. Because sometimes it's hard to move through the world and we protect ourselves the best we can. And the fourth one in this series is called Clouds and Grace. My Black is learning to walk on clouds of confidence and blood-bought grace. And I'm happy to answer questions about these later on in the Q&A. I'll end on the last, on a note of joy. This piece I created, so most of the ones that you've seen so far, I created them using images from magazines, painted papers that I have made, but on occasion I will use fabric, and especially African fabric. This is Ankara material. And so here I was thinking of, as I launch out, I graduate in June, which is very exciting. So how do I think of the future? And I also made this last year on the eve of the inauguration, and just thinking about coming to a different space of looking at, despite some of the division in this country, there is some hope going forward. And so the future looks bright is and trying to embody that. And finally, Dance in the Deep is one of the very first pieces I made at the very start of the pandemic. And I would say it's also one of the first ones that I started thinking I could do this. I could really lean into what it means to be an artist. Because when I got to slow down, when I was able to stop, doing all the things that I like to do, this showed up. And I don't think I had given myself enough time and space to dedicate to build out something like this. So my hope for all of us, post-pandemic, but even just as in school and as we are kind of going through the ebbs and seasons of life, it's that I will dance unfettered and unbothered like summertime when this is all over. And again, thank you to everyone. And I'll turn it back over to the team.
Thank you, Ade. That was fantastic. Now I'll pass the mic to Natalie so she can introduce Brian and his art.
All right, thank you so much, Ade. I know we were all so grateful to see your work and to hear you talk about it and talk about it with such passion and such joy. And it's so beautiful, and just wanted to say thank you and how moved and touched I am for how vulnerable you were in sharing. Now I have the honor to introduce our next artist, Brian. Brian is an Air Force veteran, a photographer, and a videographer. His work concentrates on street, social, and studio photography. Brian is currently pursuing a BFA in photography through Seattle University. Brian took an interest in social photography through his travels with the military and creates work that documents not only beauty, but the struggle that connects us. So without further ado, I'm so honored to welcome Brian.
Okay, friends, we're gonna start out with his day in the life. And so let me know if people give me like a little thumbs up when people can hear the video.
Brian Lamar, and this is how I try to explain my art. The way that I see it, you can't take an accurate photograph unless you're there. In this way, I'm present in all of my photography. This is why when you look through my camera, you first see photos of my family, my home, my daughter, and my wife. This is just where I am, always behind the camera as an extension of myself. And knowing this, I know that to capture interesting moments, you need to live an interesting life. I often find myself either in the city,
Oh, I think the audio.
in time, I'm somewhat removed. And still, as I travel with my lens, I see love and thoughtfulness and conflict and suffering. And so The next step in my photography is typically to breathe. I breathe with my family. Here is where I laugh. After a well-deserved breathing session, it's time for me to process the experiences that I've captured. This is often the longest portion of my artistic process. I might take hundreds of pictures in an afternoon or at even more intense times within minutes. And as before, when I had the camera to shield me from direct contact with the world, this is where I'm able to dissect second by second a scene or an idea or an emotion and be raw. Oftentimes I see
Oh, I think we lost the audio again.
emotions and tie that into my selection for final images. And once I've selected my images, I reflect on the best way to present them. Sometimes it may be a solitary image that I want to be seen on your phone, and at times I feel the best way to experience the image is in person and around others so that there can be some sort of discussion. While I'm making the final image, a lot of times it's therapeutic. This again is where I breathe, take in the experience again, and basically from start to finish. And at the end, I emerge with the final image and present it to the world. So I guess my photography is a lot like breathing. I take in the moment, I let it sit with me for a while, and then eventually I release it.
Thank you so much. A round of applause. Such a wonderful video. Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing a little piece of your life with us. Such a beautiful video. And we're so excited to see your art now, a closer look at your art. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for making it out. I'm so honored to be able to be featured today and to kind of get to share what I really love to do. And so I guess today I'm going to give you guys a little peek into something I'm calling Justice in Cyan. These are cyanotypes dealing with the 2020 protest that went worldwide, but also heavily in Seattle, and that's where I was able to photograph and collect video and audio from. It was kind of just this this perfect storm when COVID hit and we had high tensions, people staying at home, social media, so people are able to organize super fast, and a spark. And we just all kind of watched as the world ignited. And even in Seattle, we were able to see people from all around the world coming together against police brutality, and that spoke to me. I was lucky enough to have a camera, and yeah. So guess without further ado, I'd like to share a video that I made. It's some audio from some of the protests, along with some of the photos from Justice in Cyan. And a quick thumbs up. Are people able to see this? Excellent. And hopefully you can hear as well.
To those of us that have lost hope, enough of that. That's not something that you can lose, because once that's gone, you have nothing left. we have nothing left.
When you talk about democracy, you talk about the people having a say in their government. You talk about people being able to vote and people's voices being heard. But at what point do you have to hold your government accountable for what they're doing to the people?
And it's important for us to know that we're here today and we're part of this movement today, that we do not let it die here. Like I said, the government is trying to silence our people with fear and intimidation. It is up to us. Amplify these voices. That is just one step, is amplifying the voices. We've had these fights in previous generations, but what has happened is, with fear and intimidation, they used to bring our people down, and people kind of go about their ways and will go back to suffering and smiling. And we say enough is enough of that. We have to keep the momentum going. And I want to emphasize the unity of our struggles. Is that not the same thing that is happening here in the US with the police system? Is it not the same thing? In the UK, the same thing. Black people fighting against the police. It's 2020. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
I went to a protest on the 30th of May, 2020 in Seattle on 5th and Cherry. And I had an interesting experience.
Thank you, thank you. So wonderful. Another round of applause. So powerful, and so in keeping with Black History and Black History Month. I mean, that is history that you've documented so powerfully. And so thank you so much for sharing it with us, and allow you to explain a little bit more as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess the first thing that I would have to say is, why photography? Now, I've been into the arts since as long as I can remember. I can see my mom's nodding. It was music and painting and poetry, but photography was easy, and I didn't have the patience to sit around and paint, and photography is pretty instant. And then once we look into photography, there's different ways to present it. And so for here, I went with cyanotypes. I'm going to go ahead and share a still image of the work while I'm explaining it. I think I'm showing you my Finder window. Are people able to see this? Or is it still my Finder window?
We can see it.
Okay, great. And yes, and so traditionally I like to work in black and white, just so I can find that the color can be a distraction. And so I went with this process called cyanotypes. I take the photographs and put them into a digital negative, kind of like back in the day in the dark room, except I blow them up pretty huge, and I coat the paper into this photosensitive emulsion, and then I get to kind of just sit it out in the sun and watch it develop. I find something really special about that, because every single cyanotype is different and has different imperfections, different clarity, and you can't see exactly what you have underneath until until you, I guess, until you pull back the cover on it. And once you pull back the cover on it, then you can never put it back on in the same way. And so it's just finished. And so for a perfectionist in photography, the cyanotype is a way for me to let go a little bit of control and also to see how the image looks while it's a little bit faded and a little bit distorted. And then, yeah, oh yes, and then street photography as well. I wanted to touch on why I like street photography. And I do street and also studio, but street photography is my favorite, just to be able to see what's around, really, and to present that. And when you're in the street, you don't really have much control about what's going on. And so really you're just kind of in this weird zone of being there, but also being outside of the situation. And then once you come back away from that zone, you're able to process it. I think that's really something special about the way that I get to practice my art. Stop sharing now, and yeah, I'd love to field any questions or anything when that time is appropriate.
All right, we're going to move on to the Q&A portion now. So if you have any questions as an audience, if you want to chat them or raise your hand and your little virtual hand, and we can call on you. But we'll start out with Jackson. Has some questions for Aude.
Thank you, Natalie. One question I had for Aude was, what drew you to this particular art form that you use as a meaning of expression, and how it affects your message?
Thanks, Jackson. Funny enough, I was drawn to collage by first making vision boards. I had made the vision board for the first time in 2015, I think. And I find them useful for setting intention, but more than that, I just really, really enjoyed cutting up paper and gluing things down. And I was trying to understand why. Like, what was it that was so satisfying about this? And then I started hearing more and learning more about collage as its own art form entirely, and discovering Black artists who also do it, Leora Campbell, Assemblage, thinking of the TSR, and realizing how you could put in your own voice. But kind of similar to Brian, collage is also very immediate, right? I can grab things, put them together, and end up with what I want. And some of them can take longer, but you can end up with a solid piece in a few minutes. And there's something really rewarding about how immediate it can be as well. I also think it's a low barrier of access. All you need is a glue stick and some magazines or whatever you want to put together, right? So it also doesn't require a lot in order to do this kind of work.
Thank you so much.
I have a question that I would like to ask Brian. I'm wondering sort of what role you feel art plays in Black expression and in social change movements, and how has that impacted your life and as a Black artist?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think that the art, when it comes down to social change and social movements, plays a really imperative role in shaping the narrative. You hear all the time, it's the victor who writes history. And so if you are being oppressed and you are doing something to change history, then are you going to be the one to shape your narrative? And so taking the art and giving it to, or putting it in our own hands, gives us that opportunity to present it out to the world in the narrative that we see fit.
Yes, I love that. I love that. I think it's so important for Black people to share their own stories and to use their voices as well, and as both of you have. And Ade, I'd love to hear your answer to the question as well, of sort of how you feel Black art fits in social movements and in narrative creating.
Thank you, Natalie. I absolutely agree. I think it's about telling our own stories. I think the other piece of that that is really powerful is it starts to get to the idea that being Black is not a monolith. We have multiple stories, right? And so when we all say Black, but if you are born here versus in the Caribbean versus on the African continent, your concept of Blackness is quite varied as well. Not to layer, gender on top of that, not to layer, socioeconomics on top of that. So we all experience these very differently. And I think those are the things that start to kind of blow apart this idea of, where insert your stereotype here, right? So yes, it's. I think art plays a role in that it gives a voice sometimes to things that we cannot quite articulate, but we know they're there, right? We've lived them, but we don't necessarily know how to explain them. So sometimes it's about seeing your story in a piece of work, a piece of performance, and starting to go, I identify with that. If you're not, and we're talking about Black people, but anyone, if you're not in this community that is now shown, it should now start to get you to go, wait, why this actually expands my idea of what these people are about, might be. And if it's contrary to how you've grown up, then it starts to challenge stereotypes. And for me, that's the strength of it. That's the strength of artistic expression. It starts to get people to think a little broader.
Yes, yes. I think both Brian and Ade's work shows that sort of idea that Blackness isn't a monolith, and we have two amazing artists, and their work is so different, and their experiences are so different. And they both have produced such amazing work to talk about sort of the Black experience and Black resistance and all of these different aspects, which is amazing. I want to open it up to see if any of our wonderful audience members have any questions, if they'd like to vocalize them out loud or write them in the chat.